Now Mary stood outside the tomb crying. She turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but did not realize that it was Jesus. He asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned toward him and cried out, "Teacher!" For Christ also suffered to bring you to God. He was put to death in the body, but made alive in the spirit. After being made alive, he went and made proclamation to the imprisoned spirits, to those who were disobedient long ago. The earth shook, rocks split apart, and tombs opened. The bodies of many godly men and women who had died were raised from the dead, and they left the cemetery after Jesus' resurrection, went into the holy city of Jerusalem, and appeared to many. One more clip. Early Easter morning, after I had spent the entire night in prayer, Jesus appeared before me. He appeared in an instant like a gust of wind and said to me, "God is in great sorrow because of the pain of humankind. You must take on a special mission on earth having to do with heaven's work."
I know you've heard this joke before, but you know the one about you go into a business office and you see a sign on the wall? I know you know it. It's something like this. If you don't believe in the resurrection of the dead, just come to this office at about 5 o'clock. Every day, the dead come back to life. You know, I wanted to try to speak to you about the resurrection because it's Easter. It's, for me, not really such actually an easy thing to do because as I reread the scriptures again and again this week, there's many things about them that are complicated. And yet, the story is there, the resurrection story. So how to kind of like understand it? That was my challenge. Maybe for you, there's really nothing extraordinary about it, and it all completely falls into place and it makes sense. But for me, it was a challenge. I say that because as I was rereading the Bible again, I noticed many appearances took place around the time of Jesus. For example, I spoke about this before, but the Mount of Transfiguration. The disciples, 3 of them, go with Jesus up to the top of a mountain, and they're there, and suddenly Moses and Elijah appear to all of them. They all see them. Both of these people have been dead for hundreds of years. What was that happened to them? Later, in the time of Jesus' life, after he's crucified, after he's died, there are many appearances of Jesus. He comes back. We read one of them where Mary has gone to the tomb early in the morning to pray, and she doesn't know who the man is that's speaking to her. She thinks it's the gardener. That to me also is amazing. Why did she think it was the gardener? On the road to Emmaus, there were 2 disciples who met Jesus. They didn't know him. He walked with them all day till they got to the point where they sat down to have a meal. And only then, it said, were their eyes opened and they realized it was him. So, it's Jesus, but then again, why they don't recognize him? These are the questions I'm asking myself, which make it kind of complicated. Why don't they recognize him for so long? Continue. After Jesus has been with the disciples in many, many appearances, there's this unusual verse in the book of Matthew that was read, and what happens? The earth shook, the earth split apart, and many of the saints who had fallen asleep come out of the tombs, and they leave the cemetery, excuse me. They leave the cemetery and they go into the holy city of Jerusalem, and they appear to many. They appeared to many people who had, they used the term fallen asleep. Well, why isn't there more scripture readings about this? Why didn't more people write about it? If many saints who died went into Jerusalem and they appeared to many people, why is it only in that one and only Bible verse? I'm wondering. That would have been an astounding event. So, with all these appearances that are going on, then, why do we single out Jesus and say he rose from the dead, but we leave Moses and Elijah, who came to the Mount of Transfiguration, alone? We don't include them. And we don't really include all the saints who appeared and went into the holy city, whoever they were. It doesn't mention one by name, but they're there. They're in the scriptures. Do you see why it's complicated? I'm wondering what's going on. And I've been praying about this and trying to understand it. And I'll start with the story of Stephen, who was the first Christian martyr. When Stephen is stoned by the Sanhedrin because of his tremendous faith in testifying to Jesus, they get upset with him. They want him to shut up. He refuses. So they take him out of the city to stone him. And it said they did stone him, but when they were finished and he was dead, the way they write about that is they say he fell asleep. So falling asleep means you're dead in the Bible, in those days. And when we translate it, that's kind of how it comes out. It's a euphemism, or it's the same word for falling asleep and dying. You know, I'm not a Greek scholar or anything, so I can't explain these things other than that's what it means. Well, there's another clue in that story of Stephen as to what happens, because as they're stoning him, the heavens open, and it's recorded, it's written there, Stephen's testimony. I see Jesus sitting on the right hand of God, which enraged them even more. But they didn't see Jesus. Only Stephen saw Jesus. I think that what we're talking about when we say resurrection of Jesus is nothing other than a spiritual man, his own spirit man, is seen by people who are living on the earth. So Stephen's spiritual eyes opened and he saw Jesus, but those who were stoning him couldn't. Their spiritual eyes were not open. And all these stories of Jesus, they're in the upper room praying. They lock the doors because they're afraid of being caught as Christians and losing their life. They lock the doors, and suddenly Jesus is inside the room and he appears to them. He doesn't need to do the things he used to do, like knock and ask them to let him in. He never did that in his physical life, went through a door. It was a spirit man. And only those whose spiritual eyes were open could see him. So then why do we say Jesus came back to life? Why do we say these things? I think we say it because he did, but not in the sense that we are sometimes thinking of. He did come back to life. I mean, so many people saw him and they still see him. So why then do we sometimes say that Jesus rose from the dead physically? Well, I think one of the simplest answers is there was no body that was found in the tomb. Somebody took his physical body. Somebody did something with it. Maybe they wanted to protect it. Whatever happened to the physical body, it's very similar as to what happened to Moses. When he went up to the mountain and looked into the land of Canaan, he died there, and his body was never found. There was never a burial for Moses. It does say in the scriptures that his body was contended, fought over by Michael and another archangel. I think it was Lucifer. So his physical body was gone, and because of this, when they saw him, they might have thought the physical body came back to life. But it didn't do things that his physical body did before. It was a totally different phenomena of living on the earth. So these spiritual experiences that they had when they saw Jesus and misinterpreted, and it's not unusual to do that because spiritual experiences can be so real. And if you've had them, you understand what I'm talking about because they can be so real. I once heard a voice. I was so shocked, but there was nobody around me, but I heard the voice just like it was next to me. And it was telling me things, and I knew, I had no shadow of a doubt that it wasn't Jesus' voice. But there was nothing else. And I was driving down the freeway. There was nobody else with me, and the voice was just as clear as could be. So it was a spiritual experience, I'm sure. Now, let me just say, before someone says, well, that's not our traditional belief. What if the most amazing of all the apostles had spiritual experiences that he himself was not able to say whether he was in the spiritual body or the physical body when he had them? And that's exactly what happened to Paul, the apostle. He said in 2 Corinthians that he was caught up into the third heaven, and he says, whether in the body or out of the body, I don't know, only God knows. He couldn't say what happened to him. I think he might have thought it could have been the physical body because he might have been a believer in the physical resurrection. But I don't know. That's all he wrote. He said, only God knows. But if he himself couldn't determine, and he was the greatest of all the apostles, and he was the only one that was witnessed to by Jesus in spirit, right? Jesus knocked him off his horse on the way to the Damascus with the bright light long after the crucifixion. Anyway, it's Easter morning, so I feel like it's good to look at this a little bit more deeply and try to see clearly what really happened 2,000 years ago at the time of the crucifixion and on Easter morning. What we do know, and we believe in the phenomena of spiritual rebirth. We believe in being born again, and that takes the work of Jesus and the Holy Spirit. The rebirth could only come after the 40 days where Jesus was on the earth with the disciples after he died. We know we need that rebirth, and we know that only Jesus and the Holy Spirit can provide that. Why then do we say about Jesus and his return as a spirit man, why do we talk about it differently than anyone else? That's the point I'm trying to get to. And I think the reason we do this is because no one, as a spirit person who ever came back, did the things that Jesus did. One of them is the phenomena of rebirth, but if you look at other things too, when Jesus comes and helps people, what happens? Often it's miracles, right? When he was on the earth, he healed people. They were blind and he gave them their sight. Personally, I believe this is a spiritual phenomena where spiritual power is coming through him. But also, later, after his crucifixion, he healed many people. I know people who were healed by Jesus in their own lifetime, and they're contemporaries of mine. So there's tremendous spiritual things that happen based on Jesus' spiritual life. There is grace, there's forgiveness of sins, there's tremendous love that we can feel that can heal us of so many things, addictions or whatever they might be. There's courage and faith that comes when we believe and call on Jesus. There's strength and there's power. All of these things are hopes that Christians have, that they can receive by their belief in Jesus as their Lord. And he has said to us, all we have to do is believe. And amazing things can happen. He can come and he can help, whatever our troubles are. I sometimes think about this when I think about the resurrection and what really the resurrection was. It is that Jesus went from the position of living on the earth as someone who was misunderstood, who was abused, arrested, tried, condemned to death for his supposed sins. All these things happened to him based on that 3 years of ministry when he was living as a man dedicated solely to the work of God. He sometimes didn't know where he was going to spend the night. He said, the foxes have their dens and the birds have their nest, but the Son of Man has no place to live, to rest his head. So he went from that kind of life through his death and into the spiritual world, and then what happened to him? It was a totally different kind of life, because in the spiritual world, he could be seen for who he really was. Therefore, just as Moses and Elijah wanted to visit him on the Mount of Transfiguration, these two greatest men of the Old Testament wanted to be with him in the spiritual world where he was dwelling, as well as all those saints of the Old Testament age. They wanted to be with Jesus. He was the fulfillment of their prophecies, and they knew who he was. Because in the spiritual world, you can't hide things. So they knew who he was. Jesus went from being kind of like, almost in a sense, a homeless man during his life on earth, those 3 years of public ministry, to becoming, as the prophecy was about him, a King of Kings. Because that's the way he could live in the spiritual world. He was the closest of all people to God, and he received God's love and God's light, and he was shining, and everybody in the spiritual world knew who he was. Isn't that a resurrection of sorts? From a very difficult, tragic life to a life where you suddenly become a king of kings. But it's only in the spiritual world. On earth, it's still very difficult for his followers. In some senses, not always. I mean, some churches are filled with people who don't have many problems. And some churches that minister to those who are addicted or in difficult situations, they're ministering to those whose problems are much more evident. But in either case, the promise to the believers is that when they go to the spiritual world, it'll be a new life. It'll be a different life, a resurrected life in a sense. So when I think of the resurrection, I think of the hope that came to everyone because of what Jesus did after his death. The hope came. There was a hopeless situation for the disciples. They locked themselves in rooms and didn't want to go out and be seen publicly for fear of their life. But once Jesus returned and ministered to them, they became men and women filled with hope and courage and were able to go back out, even in a hostile society, and testify to Jesus, just like Stephen did. They would not shut up. They wanted everybody to know who this man was. So the hope wasn't just in their lives, but that they would be transformed like Jesus, but the hope was, I believe, very much centered on the second coming. Because all the dreams are to be realized at the second coming, right? That's the time the kingdom of heaven is to come. That's the time that all our tears will be wiped away, and the new heaven will appear, and we will be able to live there. Those are the promises in the book of Revelation, and Jesus says, I will return. And he told his disciples that in the 40 days of resurrection, that he would return. And that's part of the reason why they had so much courage and faith. They wanted to see that even in their own lifetime. And to one disciple, he was telling him that he would return. And he said, some of you will not even see death before I return. So they felt that incredible hope and therefore wanted to spread the Gospels and reach the rest of the world as soon as possible, because that was one of the things that would be contingent upon the second coming, that the gospel would have to go throughout the world, and the whole world would be prepared. So I'm coming to the end of my message this morning. The hope is the message that I have for you, that the hope will be realized at the time of the second coming. And of course, those are the times that we're living in right now, the time of the second coming. There's many ways we can know that. I won't go into it, but from the study of the parallels of history and other things, we can know that this is the time. But I just want to say that the thing which Jesus wanted so much to realize on the earth, but he wasn't able to do because of the crucifixion, was to do what hope, or what pretty much everybody wants to do in their lifetime. And that's what Jesus wanted to do. He wanted to find someone that loved him as a wife, that he could establish a family with, that he could have a lineage with, children and grandchildren, and live to a wonderful, ripe old age. Jesus did not want to be crucified at the age of 33. He wanted to live a long and happy life. And that's, I believe, what he was praying for in the garden before the soldiers came. But at the same time, more than his own desire, of course, God's desire was first. And the work that he had to do on the earth was not going very well because of the disbelief was so strong. But that disbelief was not what God intended. That was the result of many problems. But God had prepared the people to receive him. For 2,000 years, he waited and prepared. So the disbelief caused the crucifixion. They didn't understand who it was they were crucifying. If they knew it was Jesus the Messiah, if they believed in that, they never would do it. But if Jesus could have established a family, and the disciples could have had families, and the kingdom could have been realized at that time through a society of such families, and Israel could have become transformed as a wonderful holy land of wonderful families, and the world, country by country, as the message spread. And I believe that's what Jesus wanted and intended, but it didn't happen. And of course, no fault of his own, but because of disbelief. So sociologically speaking, and I've said this to you, I think once or twice before this year, the big problem that we have is we don't know how to live together with one another. Somehow we end up fighting with our spouses. It gets to the point where it's too difficult to live together, and we go and look for another. And children are born into families where there aren't mothers or fathers. And sociologically speaking, so many situations that society doesn't welcome come because families are not yet what they're meant to be. It takes a lot of work to be a mother and a father, to be parents that can stay together, that can raise a family. It takes a lot of effort and work. And I can't blame anyone for not being able to do that because it's so difficult. But thank God for His grace and blessings, and that we continue and we try and we stay on this road to go forward into the future in faith that it will get better. And we keep our families as intact as we can, and we keep trying. So the wonder of the second coming of the Messiah is the hope in seeing what blessed families of true husbands and true wives really look like. And that is our challenge, isn't it, congregation? We look at Easter and we have hope because there's many things to have hope in, but it's still a difficult road that we choose to go. To believe in ourselves and to believe in our spouses, to believe in our families, to believe in the future, it takes special. I want to give thanks to our dear elder brother, Jesus, who never gave up. It's for you and for me that he did what he did, and for anybody and everybody. And it's amazing what he did. And I don't think any of us would be here if it wasn't for him. So today, this is the day to recognize Jesus and remember what he did and try to understand what he did. And from that hope in the return of the Messiah, the Lord, at his second advent, try with new hope, with new determination to go forward and to realize big changes. The country needs it, and they need families like you that have so much to offer.